Bleh. These teeth are crazy. Look how big they are. Hello, my name is Kylie. I go by Kyle's McGiles online, and today I'm going to start my first episode in my series of Read Everything on Your Shelf. And if you've seen the thumbnail on my screen, on your screen, you'll see that this is a science fiction double feature. I can't speak with these teeth. And today I am going to be talking about my review, my thoughts, and overarching themes of Bram Stoker's Dracula and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So this episode is going to be broken up into two parts. I'm going to start with looking at Dracula by Bram Stoker, and then I'm going to move on to Frankenstein in the same video. I figured it'd be way better to do it this way, because I want to do a little bit of a comparison at the end. And it's spooky season, so I want to use this set twice. So this is what we're gonna do today. I listened to both books in an audiobook form instead of reading. That's why this one is not cracked open, but it will be cracked open eventually when I go back and do some more analysis on it. But this is just my overarching thoughts, my first impressions of the book, a tiny bit of research, nothing too in-depth, and then I'll eventually go back and do some more videos on them later on. This is just to go through the Read Everything on Your Shelf challenge. Without further ado, let's dive into what I'm thinking about Dracula. Ooh. So Dracula is written in a series of letters. This is an epistolary novel, and we begin the story with Jonathan Harker coming to visit Count Dracula in his castle while he helps the Count look for property in London. The Count treats Jonathan with kindness, takes good care of him, until, against Dracula's warning, Jonathan goes and explores the castle on one of the days that Dracula leaves. Jonathan eventually comes across 3 vampire women within the castle and is about to be attacked by them. And after Dracula saves Jonathan from the 3 vampire women, Jonathan is incredibly shaken. Once Dracula leaves the castle, Jonathan escapes and is admitted to a hospital in Budapest. In these series of letters that we get a log from somebody who was on a ship. And Dracula takes a ship called the Demeter to London with his boxes of earth, as Dracula can only sleep on boxes of dirt from his land, so from Transylvania. So he has to take it with him to London. In this log, we learned that the entire crew disappears one by one until there's one person left manning the ship and gearing it into the port of Whitby, where, as they are about to dock in Whitby, a large dog comes flying off the ship. So us, the reader, assumes that is probably Dracula. At this same time, Jonathan's fiancée, Mina Murray, receives a letter from her friend Lucy Westerna. Lucy has received 3 marriage proposals from Dr. John Stewart, Quincy Morris, and Arthur Homewood. Lucy decides to accept Arthur's proposal, but remains friends with Dr. Stewart and Quincy. Lucy and Mina go on holidays in Whitby, where Lucy begins to sleepwalk and wandering around the churchyard with a dark figure looming over her. Mina takes her back to where they're staying and keeps Lucy from sleepwalking by locking their door, until one night she points to the window from a dead sleep, and there is a bat at the window. Another quick slight reference to Dracula. Mina is worried for Lucy and her missing fiancé all at the same time. But around this time, Mina finally hears back from Jonathan, who's been missing for a while, and she travels to Budapest to nurse him back to health. As Lucy returns home, she has a lot going on and contacts Dr. Stewart, and he contacts her past professor, Abraham Van Helsing, to determine why Lucy is sleepwalking and unwell. Professor Van Helsing knows what is going on, but keeps it to himself, calling for blood transfusions. When the professor leaves, he covers Lucy's room in garlic to ward off the vampires, but eventually Lucy's mother finds the garlic and removes it, as she doesn't know what it's there for. When the wolf-like creature comes to frighten Lucy and her mother, Mr. Westerna dies of a heart attack instantly, and Lucy dies shortly after. After being buried, news emerges that a beautiful woman is stalking children at night, and Van Helsing decides that it's Lucy in her vampire form. So he gathers Lucy's bachelor candidates. So once they enter into Lucy's tomb, they realize she is no longer there. One of them surmises that maybe she was just stolen, but then she comes back in a vampire form into the courtyard. Once they see that she is a vampire, they then stake her heart, behead her corpse, and leave garlic in her mouth. Delicious. So as Mina and Jonathan return back to London, Jonathan's healthier and doing much better now. They return to help Van Helsing, Dr. Stewart, Quincy, and Arthur as they heard of Lucy's death. And they are aiming to fight and kill Dracula. Van Helsing tells everyone that vampires can only sleep on Earth from their homeland, hence the boxes of earth from earlier. And once Dracula learns of the plans, he uses one of Dr. Stewart's patients, Renfield, to get into the asylum, where he secretly bites Mina 3 times and has her bite him back to fully turn into a vampire after her death, unless Dracula is killed. Dracula finds an opportunity to flee back to Transylvania and with the last box of earth. And Van Helsing hypnotizes Mina to use her psychic connection with Dracula to trace his location. Once in Romania, the team splits up. Van Helsing and Mina go to Dracula's castle, and the professor takes out the 3 vampire women. Jonathan and Arthur follow Dracula's boat down the river. Quincy and Dr. Stewart follow along with Jonathan and Arthur on land. This part confused me as I was listening to it on the audiobook, so I had to go back and look at it again, so it made a little more sense, so that's why I'm outlining it for you all as well, in case you choose the audiobook version. The 4 men attack the Romani men, loading in Dracula's box into a wagon. Jonathan decapitates Dracula, Quincy drives the stake into his heart, and Dracula crumbles into dust, thus saving Mina. But during the attack against the Romani men, Quincy was mortally wounded, but he dies at peace knowing that he saved Mina. And then Jonathan and Mina name their son Quincy. Very happy, blah, blah, blah. Good story for the hunters of Dracula, kinda. For this Read Everything on Your Shelf series, I don't want to spend too long on every single novel because I do want to make them pretty succinct. And then if I want to do a longer video on analysis, I will at a later date. But I just got some key pieces from a mix of Sparks Notes, Wikipedia, some other credible sources online, author critics, just really briefly. This is very bare bones, like rough draft research I would do on a video. So this isn't the full amount of research I would typically do for a full proper video. But for this series, we're gonna do some quick analysis and some key points so we can move it along. And keep me posted on if you want more longer in-depth videos for this, or if you are okay with just like very bare bones, here's some key pieces. So something I do want to point out though is Wendigoon's new video on his all channel Wendigang just came out on Count Dracula and the historiography about Count Dracula and his origins, not just in the book Dracula, but the actual Vlad the Impaler himself. So I would definitely go check that out. I'll link it here. I'll link it up at the top here as well as in the description below. Go check that out if you want more information on the history of Vlad the Impaler. With a little help of Sparks Notes, grabbing some key themes. I only grabbed the ones that I collected myself internally, but wasn't able to fully explain them. So Sparks Notes helped me a lot, and I have some direct quotes. I'll have some analysis as well. So first one is consequences of modernity. And one quote that really stood out to me that Sparks Notes highlighted was, though Stoker begins his novel in a ruined castle, a traditional Gothic setting, he soon moves the action to Victorian London, where the advances of modernity, which are largely responsible for the ease with which the Count preys upon English society. When Lucy falls victim to Dracula's spell, neither Mina nor Dr. Stewart, both devotees of modern advancements, are equipped to even guess at the cause of Lucy's predicament. Only Van Helsing, whose facility with modern medicine techniques is tempered with open-mindedness about ancient legends and non-Western folk remedies, comes close to understanding Lucy's affliction. So because Van Helsing is a bit older than the main cast, because he has a value in traditional medicine, not only just the modern medicine of Victorian England, but he also takes great strides and great pride in traditional medicine as well. He was able to identify the fact that those 2 puncture wounds were most likely from a vampire, and he was more readily able to accept that, unlike the more modern, younger group, which wouldn't necessarily right away until they had full physical proof. But with that too, it's not like Van Helsing ever tells anybody about this and doesn't really try to pass on that knowledge fully. He just kind of hints at things and doesn't fully explain himself. And this becomes a huge piece, secrecy being a major theme in both texts that we're going to look at today. But Van Helsing keeping that to himself, if he had just let, Lucy's mother know that, hey, leave the garlic there, it's for her recovery, maybe Lucy's mother would still be alive, and maybe Lucy would still be alive. We don't know for sure. But secrecy usually leads to things like this. People not wanting to be seen as mad or crazy at the time, for lack of a better term, would keep things to themselves and hide it. And it would then cause this conflict or, usually in these 2 stories, death. The threat of female sexual expression. Most critics agree that Dracula is, as much as anything else, a novel that indulges the Victorian male imagination, particularly regarding the topic of female sexuality. In Victorian England, women's sexual behavior was dictated by society's extremely rigid expectations. A Victorian woman effectively had only two options. She was either a virgin, a model of purity and innocence, or else she was a wife and mother. If she was neither of these, she was considered a whore, and thus of no consequence to society. So I'm doing a lot of research right now on the Belle Epoque era as well, which parallels quite nicely to the Victorian era, as I'm doing more videos on Clair Obscur. And we're seeing time and time again with the modernization coming from industrialization, mass colonialism, and colonization. We're also seeing huge advancements in the desires of women to have more rights. We're seeing this push for more access to women understanding their sexuality and very rigid, compact, unforgiving societal expectations. Now, usually with the upper class and the upper echelon, the bourgeoisie, you're gonna have these high expectations expected of you. But if you're of the lower class and regular, everyday Joe Schmo, you don't have these same kind of standards that are going to be held to you in the same regard. You will still have them to a degree if you're trying to move up the ladder specifically, but at the same time, it's really a piece of status. But consistently, time and time again, these status quos are broken, are disgruntled in many different ways. And we see this in the form of the young women who are afflicted by Dracula, and as they come back as a vampire, they are more sexualized, they are more wanting to be a completely different person. As they're staking Lucy, the men are recounting how much they hate this version of Lucy, how disgusting she is, how awful she is, when she was such a pure virgin soul not too long ago. And all three of the young men were wanting to be her husband. So now to have this very visceral reaction when she is something that's completely deviant and outside of Christian norms, they hate her quite a bit. Yes, she is a vampire now, so that is yes, she is a monster technically, but it's the overall implication that critics are talking about and that historians have also pointed to as well. But we're gonna come back to that because I have some feelings on that section. The promise of Christian salvation, consistent use of Catholicism to drive away vampires, communication wafers, crucifix, etc., as if anything outside of Christianity is a sin. At a time where industrialization has changed the world, minds were changing on the influence of religion. This book does feel like a lot of Christian propaganda, if you will. We don't know Bram Stoker's exact reasoning behind this, if he truly was wanting this like very Christian kind of belief system to be invoked, or if he just wanted to use it as a method of demonstrating how Victorian society treated people based on this glorification of Christianity. But it is time and time again, Christianity and different relics of Christianity are used in order to repel Dracula and repel vampires, as well as clean and cure people of their sins. So it definitely feels like a big piece of Christian propaganda. Fear of outsiders. On his last night at the castle, Harker looks at the sleeping Count and thinks with horror that this is the being that I am helping to transfer to London. He is less worried about Dracula's existence than about the threat of national contamination. The fear of Dracula as a type of foreign invasion also explains why the men are so determined later in the novel to drive Dracula back to Transylvania and stage their final battle with him there. Dracula poses the threat of literally contaminating local bloodlines with a foreign influence, and this threat reveals a deep-seated fear of outsiders gaining power and using it for evil means. So I've seen some people dispel this by saying, well, Dracula is a monster. If you're really comparing him to the real Vlad the Impaler, of course, you might have some more visceral reactions to that because Vlad the Impaler murdered thousands upon thousands of people. I've seen time and time again a lot of speculation pushing aside that theory and saying like, oh, it doesn't matter, the past is in the past, that kind of thing. But in reality, this novel really paints a picture of not wanting anybody outside of what is deemed acceptable in London itself to join the Society of London. Throughout the series, we never really truly get Dracula's perspective. And we have a series of letters that are from unreliable narrators. So did he actually do all that? So I want to come back to this point a little bit more because I have some thoughts and feelings on it at the very end. Well, one thing I do want to point out is that people do tend to look at these books and like, oh, you can't put a modern perspective on it. You can't analyze it. It's just a piece of its time. But in reality, as reading it, it was not written in a way that could dispel somebody who truly didn't feel that way. It definitely, it gives you an essence that Bram Stoker might have actually truly felt this, or he's generally pushing the fact that Victorian society was terrified of this prospect of new people coming in. And these are Eastern European people that we're talking about here. We're not talking about anyone else from around the world. They're terrified of Eastern European people who are really not much different from anyone else in Europe. To our modern perspective, back in Victorian England, they want an English person, the proper London person. And there is a lot of rhetoric in this that is definitely xenophobic and racialized as well. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit with my overarching opinions, but it is something we cannot not see. So I'm going to jump ahead to my personal notes at this point because I have a personal note that ties really well into this section. So I'm going to skip over into that. Although this is about Dracula, we never get to see his perspective, which I did not expect. The actual Count Dracula that Bram Stoker is paralyzing in his Dracula is Vlad the Impaler. And honestly, who would trust a man that would serve you on a steak with your dinner? No, thank you. However, the character Count Dracula that we meet does not seem to be like Vlad the Impaler, and the series of letters may lead to an unreliable set of narrators. Do we truly know if Dracula is doing everything they are saying? The behavior Dracula exhibits is not fully aligned with the narrative that the hunters set up of Dracula. We could say that Dracula was being deceptive to Jonathan at the beginning by hosting him, and he does eventually mention that he wanted to use him himself to the 3 vampires. But time and time again, as Dracula is hosting Jonathan, he is kind and caring. He prepares beautiful meals. He takes good care of Jonathan. When Jonathan cuts his face while shaving, Dracula reacts viscerally and just warns Jonathan, like, please be careful of shaving. I can't be around blood. And he notices that Dracula cannot be seen in the silver mirror. And Dracula it's almost like Dracula is trying to open himself up to Jonathan in a way. That's how I took it. It doesn't mean that's exactly how it is. But Dracula was in no way, shape, or form trying to hurt Jonathan throughout his stay. In fact, he was very thankful for the help that Jonathan gave him, as well as saving Jonathan from the 3 vampiric women. There are people who do place parallels to Dracula having interest in not only the women in the story, but also in Jonathan himself. So there could be an argument there. I'm not going to deep dive into that today. It's something I want to deep dive into later, about more deep topics and themes on Dracula, because I think it could be really interesting. But that's one thing I noticed for sure. And Jonathan constantly noting his eccentric behavior and kind of neglecting his behavior too once he notices the money that Dracula has. It definitely seems like he sees Dracula as almost less than himself, but because he has more money, he has some sort of value. There are many slights towards Dracula and his being. We don't fully know who bit Lucy. There were bats around. There was a dark figure. Maybe he was seducing Lucy. Maybe it could have been somebody else. Maybe because Jonathan was so hard set on how intense his interactions with Dracula were, maybe he then dispelled that onto the easiest victim he could find. Maybe Dracula is the monster they set him up to be, but because we don't actually see Dracula's perspective, do we truly know if he is that monster they claim him to be? From my perspective and how each person acted within the story, I don't fully know. And that's something I want to explore later, so I don't want to go too in-depth. But the overarching theme of anti-immigration as well as xenophobia is incredibly present in the story, if it's not directly stated. And anybody who doesn't fall into Christian ideologies or beliefs are seen as less than or sinners. We're gonna come to that as we talk a little bit about Lucy. The final blows to vampiric Lucy were incredibly violent. Normally, I do not take much notice of this written in certain pieces, like whenever there is some sort of mass murdering of a monster or a villain or what have you. Whatever method is taken usually doesn't affect me too much, but in recent years I've become more aware of how different people are treated. Throughout the story, Dracula has received so much hate and visceral hatred towards him, as well as Lucy. In the series of letters written about Lucy being impaled, beheaded, and had garlic stuffed in her mouth, desecrating her body, they talk about her visceral hatred, how this is not the Lucy they remember, how this is not the Lucy they have, how this Lucy goes and taints the minds of young children and that sort of thing. It's hard as a woman to fully believe that those 4 men went to a tomb and didn't do anything else. Not all men, but some men. And the fact that they would be so viscerally angry at Lucy, I am not accusing these gentlemen of desecrating her more than just destroying a vampire, beheading her and stuffing garlic in her mouth. But it's a very uncomfortable scene as a whole. I normally, again, do not take note of these situations, but this one just seemed incredibly off. And I want to explore that a little bit more later on as well. So this isn't to just throw that out there, throw it into the void and say this is it. That's how the story is. But I want to take a more nuanced and very introspective look on that part as well, because the hatred towards both Vampiric Lucy and Dracula do parallel quite a bit with being very much anti everything that they're about. Using the form of a monster, being a vampire, is a very interesting way to set up these people who are not falling in status quo with Catholicism, with being a normal traditional Londoner, with just following what society deems okay as a vampire, similar to a witch hunt, to then be able to ostracize and isolate and eventually kill off, because that's good too. And when they complete the killing of Dracula as well, although they do have a lot of hatred for him, and they do say that throughout the story, his death is not as hateful, or there's just a different energy to Dracula's. Maybe because there's a lot of people that they fought as well, like bringing in the Romani men into a fight, which was questionable. Did these Romani men even know what was going on? Were they even ready for a fight? That's a great question. Were they just brushed aside because they were Romani? And that's another question we can address as well. In the fact that they were just almost brushed to the side like they were nothing, like they had no families or anything. So that's important to note on the behavior of these men in the hunt party for Dracula. I do heavily agree with the criticisms I've encountered about Dracula. Throughout my listening experience, I find the themes to be heavily rooted in the condemnation of the outside world of a perfect Christian being with a strong conflict of traditionalism and modernity. So I definitely think that's there. With the villain of modernity being non-white folks, sexualized women, and worship outside of Christianity, I think that is a very plausible, very accurate criticism of Dracula. From my brief research into Stoker, there is no telling if he was purposely highlighting the issues of Victorian society or also imparting his own fears on the page. Based on the time period Stoker was in, it may be safe to say that his own fears of modernization are reflected on the page. From a modern perspective, we may immediately brush the story off as having an awful message, but it allows us to look into the mind of society at this time, which, as a historian, is an absolute treasure to stumble across. It can help analyze political choices, societal expectations, and the cacophony of emotions leading towards a moment in history. As this is Victorian England and we're entering into the end of this century, there are a lot of issues going on at the same time. As I'm researching the Belle Epoque era, we have the Franco-Prussian War just going on not too far away. We have so many different issues and conflicts coming up all around Europe, let alone the rest of the world has stuff going on too. But if you're just looking at the bubble that was England at the time, we're seeing a lot of conflict, a lot of change, really fast, rapid change as well. And that really puts people into a panic. My final rating. So here's the rating scales. I'm gonna put it on the screen here. I have it color coordinated. I cannot find my last page of my Read Everything on Your Shelf challenge, so I'm gonna have to reprint it. Thank goodness I scanned it for you guys. But I'm gonna rate Dracula a purple. Not my favorite story, but an excellent audiobook to read by Christopher Lee with insight on the Victorian mind. An interesting case study to analyze, but this is not a piece I'd want to pick up again for fun. I'm going to pick it up in an academic sense, but for me, it just was not my favorite thing. And that's okay. And just because it's not my favorite thing, that doesn't mean you should not pick it up and try Dracula. I think you should definitely listen to the audiobook. I don't want to link it down below because I don't want to get that channel struck. Because technically speaking, I think that audiobook is not allowed to be released online. So with any audiobook, of course, you want to support your artists, you want to support the original creator. But in a time where our economy is so awful, and sometimes you can't find it in the library, but if you can, try your local library out, because at least you can get a licensed copy of the reading. You can always YouTube whatever book, audiobook, depending on the copyright laws, it might be more accessible. For this one, since it's narrated by Christopher Lee, there's probably a couple of copyright issues there. So I'm not going to put the exact link, but you can look up Dracula audiobook Christopher Lee. Your ears will be blessed by a fun experience. It's a great 2.5 hour listen, almost 3 hours. So if you're doing some arts and crafts, carving pumpkins, that kind of thing, if you want to get into the holiday spirit of Halloween, that is a great way to do it. Do not get mad at me. You can tell me down below how you felt about Dracula, your opinions, what you think about that criticism. Did you learn anything new? Anything you want to add? Of course, you can put it down below. But with that, it's a science fiction double feature. So let's talk about Frankenstein. All right, next up on our science fiction double feature, we've got Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which I didn't realize I do not have. I have a whole collection of these classics, and I swore I had Frankenstein, but I guess I don't. Good thing I let Christopher Lee serenade my ears with the beauty that was Frankenstein. Unlike my feelings towards Dracula, I absolutely adored Frankenstein. So I will go through the exact same process again that I just did with Dracula, and then at the very end, I'm gonna have a little comparison. So stay with me. So we have another epistolary novel, except we're reading from the letters of Robert Walton to his sister. But then we switch to Victor Frankenstein's perspective as he divulges the events leading up to his encounter with Robert and his team, as he is recounting the story of Frankenstein and Robert pens it down. Victor Frankenstein talks about his happy youth in his upper-class life as a Genovese as a Genovese child with his family, and eventually adopted sister Elizabeth. After his mother dies of scarlet fever, his obsession with alchemy leads him to attend university, where he completely loses himself to his studies in creating life and ignores his family for years, until he successfully creates a creature that he is horrified by, and he flees right after birthing his creature. Victor is shaken after creating his monster, but Henry has just arrived on behalf of the Frankenstein family to check on the isolated Victor. After months of Henry nursing Victor back to health, Victor receives a letter from his father explaining his brother William has been murdered and to return home promptly. Victor immediately knows that the murderer is his creature, but he tells no one in fear of being locked away for being mad, or no one believing him. Once reuniting with the family, they are to attend the trial of their longtime confidant, Justine Moritz, who is being tried as William's murderer for having the locket that was taken from William's body. Regardless of Elizabeth's character reference for Justine, she pleads guilty and is killed for her crime, while Victor believing all along that this was his creation's doing, but still not saying a word. As Victor is depressed and upset with everything going on, he seeks out nature and goes for a walk. And as Victor goes off on his walk to Mer de Glace, he finds his creature walking around. The two of them have a long standoff between them until the creature can finally convince Victor to hear him out on where he's been over this long period of time since they saw each other last. The creature had ran away from home shortly after Victor brought him to life and fled home. Along his brief time in the world, he learns to hide from people, and he eventually finds a space where he can watch a family and learn from them over a prolonged period of time. He learns to speak and write while observing the family, teaching somebody who came from afar the language, about fire, and he finds books and learns to read, and eventually reads notes from his creator that are found in a pocket of a coat that he's took off of Victor before he left the apartment. And since the creature could read the notes, he knew how he was created and that Victor could do it again. After growing great affection for the family he had been spying on, the creature takes an opportunity to talk to the father of the home while his children are out and begs him to help him be accepted by friends he so desperately wishes to be close to. When the man's children returns, the creature is chased out and rejected harshly, causing him to flee. Along the way, he spots and saves a young girl from drowning, but her father believes him to be the cause of her falling in and shoots the creature, further angering and isolating him from society. The creature explains that when he stumbled upon William and heard who he was related to, the creature killed him instantly, took the locket, and then placed it on Justine to condemn her. Now, Justine he happened to find by chance as well, and just left the locket with her. The monster asks Frankenstein to make another creation, a female to be his partner to be together so he is not alone and he'll forget about his creator and live a happy life. Victor weighs the option but eventually agrees to doing this for the creature, as he does feel some sort of compassion, mixed with his own selfishness. Victor encounters his father shortly after, who asks if he will marry Elizabeth and become happy. Victor agrees, if Elizabeth consents. We love that piece. After he travels to England to find some joy, which is where he wants to create the creature's partner. Upon everyone's agreement, Victor and Henry go to the laboratory in Orkney, and Victor isolates himself to work on the new creation. But before completing her, he second-guesses himself and destroys his new creation before allowing her to live. This upsets the creature greatly, who states that he will be there for Victor's wedding night, as if he can't have happiness, neither can his creator. The creature then murders Henry, and upon examination of the body to prove his innocence, Victor has a mental break upon seeing his dead friend. Victor's father comes to his rescue and return him home, where plans for the wedding continue. He tells Elizabeth that he has a secret to share only after they get married, and they get married without issue. But Victor is on edge throughout, and once he tells Elizabeth to go to another room so he can guard, the creature comes and murders Elizabeth, and her death causes Victor's father to grow ill and then die. With nothing else to lose, Victor goes and follows the creature determined to destroy him, going all the way to the Arctic and almost dying from the elements, where we finally catch up to where Walton is writing. As the crew intends to return home from the Arctic, Victor dies. The creature returns and mourns and plans to end his existence, then leaves. A really sad tale of the creature. And honestly, although we do not condemn murder in the slightest, you feel terrible for the creature made by Frankenstein. It's also very interesting too how over time society has grown to call the creature Frankenstein, as that technically is a fallacy, but also Frankenstein does deserve the name. So very interesting. That's something I do want to do a history on eventually. It's something that's always interested me. But it's really important that with a lot of these stories, it's same with Dracula, there are a lot of things going on at play that are below the just the surface of the story. There's so much more that they're discussing and talking about. And when you do understand these eras and when you kind of look into the nuances and the deeper thoughts going through the author and society's mind, it's very interesting to see where people are going with that. Key characters and themes. Again, I use Sparks Notes to help me generate the well thought out idea titles for like little headings. This one I didn't lean on so heavily for quotations from each one, but it's just anything that Sparks Notes was able to articulate that I couldn't, I've included. There's a longer article on the themes. And I will link that Sparks Notes link that I use. You're welcome to go look at it. It's a great place to start from and then build upon. Similar to Wikipedia, a great place to start, take a look at their citations and build from there. And those are two great starting points. So I highly recommend them. Family and the role of paternal responsibility. So throughout this story, Victor is completely isolating and rejecting the child that he has created. Yes, he's created on his own. Yes, it is against all warnings in alchemy. To insert a Full Metal Alchemist reference here. I mean, his father's name is Alphonse Frankenstein. We got Alphonse Elric, Edward Elric. Ugh, you're gonna get me started. So hearing these names and seeing how Frankenstein finally goes through it, I can kind of see the brainchild of Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. But the absence of Victor Frankenstein just took the time to care for his creation, to teach his creation. Maybe the monster would never actually be a monster. We see throughout time and time again, the monster genuinely was just curious about people. And the only people he murders are the people directly related to his creator. Is that okay? No. But it is completely understandable as to why the creature goes to those lengths and does those things. He's been severely rejected. He will never be accepted in society. And it's a parent's responsibility, if you bring life into the world, to take care of that life to an extent. That's why there are options that are very difficult for people to make. Adoption, surrogacy, that kind of thing. Some parents don't feel like they're ready. Some people don't. And that is a super complex, complicated issue. That's really interesting that Mary Shelley brings it to life. I haven't gone too deep into Mary Shelley because I actually want to do a deep dive into her later on. So I wanted to save that exciting research for a later video. But Mary Shelley is a very interesting person in herself. And the fact that she posted this anonymously and got society to even think about the importance of family and love and cherishing others is really important. Especially having Victor, who had such a happy childhood and a happy life and a happy home, create such an awful home and existence for his creation. And although, no, he didn't birth Frankenstein, or sorry, that's a fallacy. Although he didn't birth the creature himself, he created the creature with his alchemy. So that is still a form of being a parent. And the creature even calls him father at one point too, as he learns what a father is. So you're responsible for what you create, which is also really nice because I'm looking at Clear Obscure, which also touches upon you are responsible for what you create. And because you create something, that doesn't mean you can kill it. Same applies here. Just because you created this life, that doesn't mean you have the right to pull it out. You do not play God. And playing around with the themes of how far can you go with that? And we could probably look more too into the creation of life with the second creature that Victor was going to create for his creation, and then stopped partway through and didn't let her live. So we could talk about the fact that he did not want to bring more life in that could create more life with his original creation. He did not want to be the cause of that, etc., etc. The harmful effects of isolation and alienation. So the creature, time and time again, is very kind and caring. Are the ways he goes about things not as great, like stalking a family for a long period of time? No, but at the same time, he doesn't know any better. He has no idea. He's new to this world and doesn't know what's going on. He's learning very quickly and craves knowledge over this period of time. He quickly learns that he does not belong in society as a whole and hides away. He learns about fire and that it warms people and that you can make food and it can destroy. He learns language. He learns how to read, how to speak. Very eloquent in speech considering how long he's been alive for. And he does this, yes, through watching others, but also through his own form of learning. So the fact that the creature was able to learn that in that period of time shows a great form of intelligence that is essentially being disregarded and completely neglected by his father, creator of the creature. And although Frankenstein, and although the creature time and time again rescues a young girl, tries to go for friendship and kindness, he's never met with that kind of kindness. He also lacks the social etiquette of knowing how to do things in an appropriate manner so that maybe he could slowly integrate himself in. But that's the responsibility of a parent, of a family, of a community to help build that into somebody. It's not something you just inherently know, it's something you learn over time. And if you're isolated, you don't really understand that. I think this is a really great piece to reflect into what's going on in our time right now, especially with so many people being online. And I think this piece is incredibly interesting with that in mind as well, because what we're seeing with our young men, seeing what they see online, being influenced by these male creators that want to consistently push a agenda of a traditional home, a traditional household, a Catholic upbringing, that kind of thing. We kind of see those reflected isolations and community building as well. And the interesting thing is the one thing that the creature thinks will make him happy is to have a partner, specifically a female partner that he can fall in love with and keep him company. He wants company. He craves affection and love and to be with people. We all do. That's a very human desire. And so the fact that he wants somebody just like him that can enjoy time with him is a very interesting thing as well that I want to further investigate because there are positives and negatives to that. Monstrosity, here is one of the few quotes I did get from Sparks Notes. The monster, the creature, is only the most literal of a number of monstrous entities in the novel, including the knowledge that Victor used to create the monster. One can argue that Victor himself is a kind of monster, as his ambition, secrecy, and selfishness alienate him from human society. So due to the fact that time and time again, Victor does isolate himself from his family for a long period of time, I believe it's about 6 years, he has isolated himself from his family without communicating or anything, just so dedicated to his studies. Which sometimes we do get absorbed into what we're doing and don't reach out to our families and communities. I've been I've been that kind of person myself. But it is something to really focus on branching out, being close to your family, being in a community, chosen or otherwise. Because having a community is really important to having sanity and being a person and feeling whole, which the creature doesn't feel. Victor consistently is selfish in his choices and does not allow his creation to find happiness, to have somebody to be with him, to share in the sadness and the loneliness, where they could find happiness together. But Victor can go ahead and get married and not allow his creation to have a happy life, but he can. And his secrecy leads to the death of his young brother, of his fiance slash wife slash adopted sister, to the prosecution and death of Justine, to the loss of his father. Those are 4 people that Victor indirectly kills due to his selfishness, his secrecy. Oh, and Henry. How could I forget Henry? How dare I? 5 people that he had indirectly killed through his creation, yes, but also due to the neglect of his creation and the neglect of caring for others. He just really only sees himself, and we could argue that Victor truly is a monster in his own way. And then potentially puts the people of the boat at risk too. The only people he tells his story to are these group of people that are on a boat in the Arctic Circle. What? Overall thoughts and feelings. I enjoy the story and its prose much more than Dracula personally, but I just enjoyed the prose as well as a whole. Like, this is a very well articulate, very nice flowing story and novel. I enjoyed it from what my preferences are. I think that comes in how Mary Shelley used the letters in the story. So instead of having a series of letters, it was just really one continuous documentation. I liked the mix where you have a couple letters at the beginning and a couple letters at the end, book ending this entire history of a guy that's being written down. So again, another unreliable narrator, but this guy is like, get a load of this, retells this crazy story, sending it home to his sister, which we, the reader, seem to be in place of the sister, which is very interesting. I also love how straightforward and just well put together the story is. It was much easier for me to follow what was going on in the story as opposed to other classics that I've read, especially an epistolary story. This one is, even though it had flash forwards back and forth, it was very, you knew when. It also helped that I was listening to Christopher Lee's reading it again, so his difference in voice acting helped a lot with that too. But it was nice to not have to keep track of so many different characters. There is the main players, and they were introduced slowly over time, so that made it a lot easier to digest as well. The overt story of the creature and the creator is really interesting, as you can attach its meaning to many facets in life. In a future video, I would like to delve into disability history, especially in regards to Frankenstein as well, because I think the creation does show a very visceral reaction of how people in Victorian England may have reacted to somebody who was either just looked very different in society or potentially had a disability. So there's lots of research and history into disability studies that show that in some parts of the world, in different times of the world, there are people in the disability community who operated just everyday functions just like the rest of their family. We're working on farmsteads with them, we're working in communities. There are communities that are like that. But in the wealthy upper echelon of high society, sometimes they would hide their families away, especially if they had a disability of any kind. They'd be hidden away inside the home for a long period of time. So that could be something to look into as well and discuss. I have seen discussions about that, and I think it'd be really cool considering I have a background in disability history. Having an older sister with Down syndrome really helps with that. So it's something I've always been aware of and very passionate about. So I might look into that at a future date and talk about how people do treat people with disabilities, even to this day. This is just something I prefer when I read horror or anything, is I don't really like hearing about the murdering. I don't need to see a graphic depiction. That's just my personal taste. I don't need to know how graphic it was. I really appreciate that Mary Shelley, when she talks about the murders that happened, it was very quick. Just, oh, they were choked, or, oh, they were, they died from illness. It's not a whole long, prolonged thing. That's what I really appreciate. Compared to Dracula that went a little too deep into that, which kind of threw me off. And I'm gonna give Frankenstein a red, which means I loved it so much. I think it was a really great book. I think it was a great story. I think the prose was really well done. Of course, I enjoyed it from Christopher Lee's voice as well. That really helped. Eventually, I will get my book back wherever I put it. So this is one I will probably read again for enjoyment. Try to do it for a couple more videos as well. And I do want to analyze Dracula as well for some stuff, but I think I really want to focus on Frankenstein eventually. I think has some really interesting ideas. Between the two, I did definitely prefer Frankenstein over Dracula. But I want to talk about my preconceptions going into both books because I didn't realize how much society has convinced me of things that I didn't even realize. Like for Dracula, for example, I thought it was going to be about Count Dracula. I thought it was going to be about his adventures. I had no idea it would not even be in his perspective at all. Like Dracula is the main person they're hunting, but he's not even the main guy in the story. He's the main reason they're hunting everything. We don't even get his perspective. We don't know anything about him, really. So that was very interesting for me to even experience. I had no idea. With Frankenstein, I'm surprised I didn't know as much. Considering how long these books have been published, considering how many times we have taken the stories and re-released them, re-spoke about them, brought them into different forms of media, that the media has absolutely skewed my perception on what I thought both would be. I thought Frankenstein's monster was Frankenstein. I had heard multiple times that no, that's not the case and blah, blah, blah. It's the creature, but I didn't fully understand that until I listened and heard the creature never had a name, which is just not fair. It's a basic right for a human is to have a name. And although you can argue maybe that the creature isn't human, there's enough human inside that would probably constitute at least a name. So it makes sense that we assigned Frankenstein to the name. That would probably be his last name. If his father would ever notice him or anything. Yes, so that is my science fiction double feature. Now I want to do a whole analysis on Rocky Horror Picture Show and connecting Dracula to Frankenstein because now I actually think I can see how they even created Rocky Horror in the first place, knowing both stories in its full potential. And adding an element of a modern twist of aliens as well. So thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate you watching through if you've gotten to this point. If you liked this format, let me know. I'm not too sure if I like how I've done the summaries. I think they might be a little too long. I did try to add a visual element, but it was just mostly to re-jog anyone's mind who hasn't read this in a while. I don't want to some books I don't want to spoil, but it's kind of nice to re-jog the memory, so it's easier to do analysis. Keep me posted what you think down below. I would love to know your opinions, because then it can help me structure the rest of the series. If you like this series, let me know as well. Give me your thoughts and opinions on Dracula and Frankenstein down below. Every opinion is totally valid and welcome. Just make sure if you do not like what I say, you don't just go, no, you're wrong. Let's add some more nuance and discussion. Say, hey, I don't agree with this point, and talk about it. We've had some amazing comments on my videos and the reception has been so wonderful. So I want to keep that up and just have a really cool community that discusses these things. You guys have given me so many cool things to think of. I have been researching like crazy. For my poll, it's a 50-50 split on the Clea or Renoir Eileen video. So I'm just gonna go with whatever comes out first at this point. I have taken out a couple books from the library about Claire Obscure. I'm going to look at the source material of Claire Obscure that's Guillaume first looked at, a French story, so we'll talk about that more. I also took out Stedenhall to learn about Mael's ability and talk about Stedenhall syndrome as well. So I'm really excited. This is such a fun project for me. I'm really enjoying it. I hope you are too, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!